What if the biggest threat to your organization isn't the breach you can see, but the one you're quietly training your AI to create? What if the real danger of quantum computing isn't in 2035, but in the data being stolen today? And what if your greatest vulnerability isn't technical at all, but cultural, human, and hiding in plain sight? Today we sit down with Jay Thurston, Field CISO at Thales, a leader who's been in the trenches long enough to know what's hype, what's real, and what's coming fast. From post-quantum readiness to AI-powered attacks, from the burnout crisis facing CISOs to the rising threat of reputational manipulation, Jay brings clarity to the chaos. If you want the truth about where data security is headed and what leaders must do right now, you're in the right place. I'm Steve Prentice, and this is the Thales Security Sessions podcast. To help us dig through this multifaceted thread, it is my pleasure to sit down with Jay Thurston today. Jay, welcome to the Thales Security Sessions podcast.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's start by diving into the concept of post-quantum readiness strategies. Many people and many companies as well seem to see this as something that's still way off in the distance or in some way has been eclipsed by the generative AI revolution. But banks, however, are proving otherwise, building dedicated divisions, working with regulators, and embedding readiness into their strategies. So, Jay, what is your perspective? What are you seeing, and what is your advice?
It's very interesting. I visit different companies all the time and talk to different CISOs of different industries. And you're right, banking is by far kind of heading the charge here. But it's just, people have to realize it's not a 2035 problem, right? This is something that you have to plan for, you have to budget for, and make some strategic decisions right now. And if we're looking at kind of the best in the fields right now with banking, they're setting up those post-quantum task force. They're running crypto inventories and updating their governance frameworks. And that's what you need to do. You need to build that base foundation to be able to build on top of what's coming. And a lot of what's coming is a little bit unknown. But if you don't have that built to use your governance platform to drive those insecurities, if you will, then you're going to be lost. And I think a lot of companies are just kind of sitting back, waiting to be told what to do. And people got to get ahead of that.
Perhaps part of the problem is that the terms quantum computing and post-quantum are very broad.
Yeah.
And with any type of forced exchange, there's always that fear of the magnitude, an upheaval to an organization's already complex system and culture. Is this still the case, Jay? Are companies still facing and maybe even dreading a long list of tasks and investments to be ready for a post-quantum economy?
I think a lot of organizations, when they heard that before, they thought, well, we got to revamp everything, like hardware. All the technology has to be refreshed, revamped, and that's just not the case anymore. There are some nuances, right? If someone is in a business where payments are highly transactional, yes, those are probably going to need to be upgraded as far as the HSMs, what can handle that kind of throughput and what can't.
And by HSMs, you're referring to their hardware security module, is that correct?
Right. But if you're just talking data itself and something that might get refreshed on a 24-hour basis, you really don't need to refresh your hardware right away. You do need to refresh your post-quantum algorithms to make sure that they do address what's out there. And you can do that today. I think that's the important part that I'm trying to get out to these customers is that these are things that if you don't do it today, you're going to continue to have that harvest now, decrypt later issue impact you. And even though you can't do anything with it right now, it's good to get ahead of that game and at least feel secure that, okay, once we have quantum algorithms in place, we're just that much more protected and that much more ready.
Implementing new technology and procedures must also generate additional data sovereignty concerns, no?
Certainly not the post-quantum algorithms, just updating those do not. But when it comes to upgrading HSMs, it won't be any different than the refresh of HSMs that you've had to do in years past, whether that's you refresh them every 5 years, whatever it might be. Within Thales, we've built our own HSMs, meaning we actually built the chips themselves. So we took the concern all the way up to that data sovereignty perspective of who built the chips and in what country. So we were very concerned and ensure that we have that kind of protection end to end. So that's kind of our strength, I believe, when it comes to post-quantum.
Let's look now at the current elephant in the room, which is generative AI, of course. Everybody and everything seems to have been impacted by it. And it has, of course, ushered in a new era of AI-enhanced threats that have created a world where both sides are using it. Attackers are already using it to create code and scripts and bot armies and better phishing emails, for that matter. Obviously, organizations and security vendors are also incorporating AI technology into their exposure management and defense in-depth positions. So what are your thoughts about the fact that it seems that everywhere you turn, every day there's a new threat, AI generated, to the point that alert fatigue may be taking over? How can organizations stay safe and sane during this time of exponential change?
You said the first part better than I ever could of the alert fatigue. I got to start using that myself. But I go to a lot of these conferences where that seems to be all they deliver. You'll have two speakers that are up there, and all they're doing is putting fear in you, right? There's no, well, what do I do now, right? It's, well, 80% of the data that's out there are bots and AI, but no one's telling you what to do today. And I think what most companies have to do is reel it way back, not worry so much about all of those accelerating scare tactics, and figure out where your data sets live, and do you have a good understanding of what those data paths are, and are you protecting them? And I think it's one of those things where I find I've started inviting a lot of engineers, DevOps folks into these C-suite meetings, because I will sit there with a CISO and his executives and say, are you very comfortable with your data strategy, your crown jewels? Do you know that they're protected? And inevitably, most of them will nod their head yes. And then when I look over at the engineers or DevOps folks, they wouldn't be very good poker players, because they're kind of pulling the face like, no, wait, we're not. So I think that's something where I'm not trying to do a gotcha to them, but I'm just trying to have an open, honest conversation about what you're being told from a reporting standpoint might be different than what reality is. And that starts to open up the conversations a little bit more. So yeah, I could talk more about Gen AI and how we have to use Gen AI to fight it, but I really think it's going back to the basics. You've really got to make sure that you have that data set there. And the other thing I'll say about it is, I think a lot of folks are worried about Gen AI replacing their jobs. I just don't see that as the biggest threat at all. Sure, it's definitely going to replace some task-oriented stuff. But I think when it comes to cybersecurity, it's just going to shift what these cybersecurity engineers are focused on and what tools they have to fight against it. So I think the fear of the jobs going away is very minimal.
Oh, I totally agree. And I also encounter that as the number one question at every session and every speech that I deliver. And I try to say that it's not so much about jobs that are being taken away as to what you can become with this tool. I equate it to like a tide that raises all boats. So it's certainly interesting to hear that the same thing happens from your perspective as well, that this is the big fear, which is, of course, very natural for humans to feel. But it is a matter of what more you can do with your talents and time while AI takes care of, as you referred to, the more basic task-oriented stuff. So, Jay, do you anticipate that this represents a long-term stage of fear and procrastination, or will people get over this and start to accept it and work with it?
I think they will get over it. I do think when it comes to what I talked about in the beginning, which is stop the fear tactic and start telling me what I can do about it. If you get those automated risk signals in place, the continuous monitoring, and those data-centric AI controls, specifically around governance, making sure that you govern those controls and you understand them. Yes, it might take an entire new dedicated team to do that. But I think once you have that structure in place and you have the toll gates to allow some of those tools in and understand what data is going out, I think a lot of that fear will start coming down. But it's going to be fast-paced for sure.
We had a guest on here just a couple of episodes ago. He goes by the name of FC, and he is an ethical hacker. He gets paid to break into places and to test the vulnerabilities of a physical organization like a hospital, or even of software and open source software. His job is to think like a criminal, right? He's a professional red teamer.
Yeah, right.
In terms of AI, he said, it's the first time that we have had a technology where both the good actors and the bad actors have equal access to it at the same time.
Right.
So this makes it a bit of a different horse race because companies and organizations have the ability to make data security and so forth much more profound if necessary.
Right.
The news media is always quick to carry the big and somewhat glamorous stories of crimes like deepfake heists, but Deeper down, there are the more insidious actions like prompt injection and LLM poisoning that are heading more directly into where data lives and tries to stay safe. So let's look at the whole idea of data, including unstructured data. It's been said that this is the next big thing, the next big problem with AI amplifying the data sprawl. Companies are losing sight of all the data that they have and where it lives. So is this where tomorrow's breaches begin, through the loss of control over data?
Oh, without question. I mean, no longer do hackers have to worry about getting into the database or getting into, the different data structures that are traditional. It's going to be in Slack exports and Confluence dumps and different AI training sets and Teams files. So it very quickly went from protecting the core infrastructure to that extra level where now we have to really understand who has access to what data. Because when they bring that data in and manipulate it or put prompts against it, now what do they have access to go in and do with it? Where can they go put it? And that's, to your point, I think that's where the next level of hacking is going to happen. And I think when it comes to how companies like ours, like Thales, can help, that data discovery, classification, and policy-based protection is going to solve 90% of that, right? Tagging that data, understanding what that data is, and formalizing that. And again, it's going to take a lot of effort. And this is another one of those where when I talk to different executives at different companies, they're very confident that they have that worked out. And the people with the hands on the keyboards are shaking their head, no, we really don't, right? There's a lot of it that's worked out, but there's so much of it that is just leaking out like a sieve right now. So yeah, that's definitely going to be one of the bigger issues.
Is there also a potential for a type of feedback loop here in which good data can be collected and not just stolen, but also corrupted and fed back into the system?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. And it also includes any kind of prompt results that come out of there, right? So if we're using AI and the problem with some of this is some of that data isn't even going to be accurate, right? So some of it's going to be very important and very classified, but some of it isn't going to be accurate either, right? We still haven't made that kind of a technology leap yet. So we've got to be very careful with, even if it's not a hacker that gets a hold of it, that unstructured data, if it gets put back into a system of record, how much can we trust that data? I think that's an important part of that data flow, understanding what we can do with it and how we validate it going forward, because it's not just hackers we're worried about. It's the level of trust we have with the data itself.
One of the elements about AI that doesn't get discussed quite as much is how many jobs it will actually create, simply to keep tabs on the legitimacy of every part of the cycle, from prompt engineering all the way through to quality control, through to data governance.
Totally agree. Yeah. And I do feel it's going to be, like I said before, you're going to feel a lot of that, the data governance. A lot of companies now have a CDO, a chief data officer, but a lot don't. And so that's going to open up across the board. So at the executive level, you're going to have that. And then, of course, they're going to have structured teams underneath them. So just like we talked about before, it's not about losing the job. It's just stay educated, stay focused, and there will be roles out there for you. It's just going to be a little bit different view.
And do you think the CDO will be sitting next to the CAIO, or would they be the same person?
I think it depends on the size of the company. And that was a very big topic of discussion at one of the Gartner events that we had. And you would have it was a C-level seminar. You had some CIOs and CTOs raising their hands saying, we don't need one. And you had CDOs actually sitting there, and they kind of explained what the differences is and how they interact with the different C-levels. So I think it's going to be very mixed. And it's not much different than CISOs today, right? CISOs often report up to the CIO, and then often their peers with the CIO. So it's very, very hard to tell. But I just think it's based on the maturity and the size of the company. So there won't be any right way and wrong way.
This all points to a significant change of mindset, something that many organizations have trouble with. We might talk a great deal about being agile and of forward thinking, but it seems very difficult for organizations to turn on a dime or even be willing to.
Right.
I'm thinking, for example, of a very basic but pervasive problem that organizations aren't even nailing the security basics at this point, despite decades of awareness. The most common password in the whole world right now, for example, is still password. followed
amazing.
closely by variations on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that, of course, is then followed closely by admin.
Right.
Okay, so these are the ones that everyone's using in the business, right? Are too many CISOs being, let's say, led into a false sense of security because they're being told by their teams that basics like MFA and access control and passkey management are in place when they are not? I think you kind of alluded to that before, but yeah, even in highly regulated industries, people under pressure are still taking shortcuts and using bad passwords. Why are we not nailing these? Is it just simply our fear of the unknown once again?
I think it's a little bit of muscle memory, really. So we're so used to having reports. In the financial industry, we would have quarterly QBRs and then monthly meetings leading up to those. And it was always the same kind of, here's where we get the data, here's how we roll that data up, here's what we present. And the scoring, the RAG rating, is based on that presentation. And it is such a fast-paced environment that very seldom did people start questioning what's changed, what else should we be looking at? And that's why the C-level, the executives, are all nodding their head yes at me in these meetings, like, we're fine, there's no issue. And the people who really know where the data is, they're scared to death because they know, and it causes a bit of a problem for them because they know that once they broaden that horizon of what the scope is for them to report up, they're going to go back to amber and red. Right. So they're going to have issues that they're going to need to start solving for out of that. And I think it extends even beyond the technology teams itself, and it goes right to the regulators. I can't tell you how many times regulators come in and have asked the same questions they've asked for 5 to 7 years. They're not looking any different either. Every once in a while, you get an ambitious one, and that's where those issues bubble up, and that's where you have to start taking care of it. But that's how a lot of these organizations work, where if we're not getting audit issues, we don't need to make any changes and we're fine. And that attitude needs to change pretty quick.
It is a very human thing to be much more willing to react than proact, certainly, yes.
Yes, 100%.
And certainly, yes, so much when it becomes a part of the actual body corporate to, let's say, wait until we get audited before actually worrying about the problems. Why is that?
Yeah, and it goes right back up to the post-quantum stuff where people are reading, the NIST standards and the predictability of when this is going to happen, and they see 2035. And I think a little bit twofold. One of the issues where they don't act is because they're not being truly driven towards acting on it, or they think some vendor is going to take care of it for them. And secondly, people might just think, well, I'm not going to be in this position in that many years, I'm not going to worry about it. Right? I think that happens a lot. And it's hard for me to take those kind of attitudes. At my last position I was there for 20 years. Right? So I'm a very loyal employee. So I'm very concerned about what is that big picture and that future state look like. And whenever I meet with customers, that's the attitude I take with them is what can we do for you now that makes sense in 5 to 10 years as well.
That's a great quote. Great takeaway. Some of this sounds very typical of how we have always acted. I think about Y2K, for example. A lot of people look back on Y2K and say, it was a nothing burger. Nothing happened. Why worry? But that is despite the fact that governments and businesses around the world spent somewhere between $300 billion and $600 billion globally to fix the Y2K bug, with $100 billion of this in the US alone. So even in retrospect, it seems that people can become callous towards these kinds of threats. Let's move on and talk about team building. As a field CISO, a senior cybersecurity advisor, you bring a great deal of technological experience and wisdom to the table, but you are also, of course, required to take a leadership role, since no change or best practice can survive without an engaged team. You've told me that your team building capabilities are one of your proudest accomplishments. So let's just talk about leadership in this era and what some of the key skills that people in similar positions like CISOs and others need to ensure that they have in their toolkit.
Yeah, that is by far one of my favorite parts of where I'm at in my career. Certainly the last 5 to 10 years in my last role, having global teams in Argentina and Singapore and India, across the UK and US, you had all different kinds of skill sets, not just looking at their careers to bring everybody up, but making sure they understand how that all works transparently, meaning they would understand what that hierarchy looked like based on a partnership of trust with them about where I think they stand. And it was always a good two-way communication, but it was so much easier when someone would leave and you would then promote from within, and everyone would already expect and understand who that is versus expecting it was them. So I think that transparency is one thing about the teamwork and leadership that I really thrived on. And the team seemed to like that. But yeah, nothing made me happier than to have someone underneath me get promoted, whether it was within my team or see them go somewhere else, as long as it was growth for them. And once the global team started seeing that I was on their side to make sure that their career and livelihood was my focus, that's when they would be very, very open and trustworthy with me. And I think that's a much better way to manage than just by hierarchy only, right? You just do as I say, don't worry about, what I do kind of thing.
So it sounds like you practice the servant leadership model very diligently.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I was to ask you to summarize leadership down to one word, what would you say is the one word that describes your kind of leadership?
I hate to use what I just used, but I do think it's transparency. I do think it is having those hard conversations when you need to have them, being brutally honest with people, of course, one-on-one, making sure that they understand what it is that they need to grow, what it is that's working and not working. And sometimes you can hurt people's feelings with those kind of things if they're overly sensitive, but they're not going to grow and they're not going to change if you don't have those conversations. So I think transparency would be.
Continuing on with the leadership component, let's look at CISOs and their own career paths. The average tenure for a CISO in a specific organization is quite short, it's like 18 to 26 months.
Yeah.
And the reasons for departure include intense pressure, burnout, high stress, and increasing personal liability from security breaches and regulations. Not to mention a lack of executive support in some cases. So aside from this being a tragic fact unto itself, the departure of a CISO and the eventual hiring of a replacement must mean that an organization goes into a holding pattern for a number of months, not only in terms of nuts and bolts security, but also in building trust and establishing leadership. So what is your advice for when companies are forced to face this type of transition between CISOs?
It does, to your point, go back to leadership. And if it is known, and if it's kind of a proven fact, which I think it is, to your point, that it's an 18 to 24 month tenure, I think it's very important for the companies and the teams for that CISO to have a very clear line of who's next, right? And make sure that the current progress is very well documented and the current goals are documented. Because if someone comes in new, which often happens, right? It's not always that someone's going to get promoted from within. In fact, it's probably only maybe 20% of the time. But when someone comes in new and you don't have all of that documented and shown what that next 1 or 2 years looks like, that person is almost always going to want to put their stamp on it and make some changes. And all that does is stop the current forward progress that is there and kind of creates churn where almost nothing happens for the next year. And that's always very disappointing to see. And that goes for reorgs and those kind of things as well. You can't stop it. Those things happen all the time, but it's all about very clear future documentation, where it is that you're going, what you're going to save. And that's what I always tried to have, was where I'm going and why I'm going there. And the why was always what it's going to save the company or secure the company. Not just, I want these new products because they are the best and brightest. It's, what am I going to save the company? And if you can make those kind of arguments, then I think your battle is at least halfway done.
Do you prefer, when you think about CISOs, would you prefer to have an engineering-focused CISO or a holistic CISO? One being just focusing on the problems and then, let's say, those nuts and bolts, or another one focusing on the broader context of people and processes, as well as the actual technology. Which is better?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I could say which is better. I do, kind of just like you just did there, whenever I'm kind of coaching our Thales staff when they're going to go meet a CISO for the first time, I do tell them there's a couple different kind of CISO, and this will sound bad, but I don't mean it bad, but like CISO egos that are out there. So some of them are in the weeds, very technical kind of CISOs, love to understand the nitty gritty of things. And others are the kind who just have their subject matter experts that, depending on the topic, they will pick and pull each one of those in. And so I don't think there's really a better or worse out of those. You just got to know who you're talking to. And I think the reason that I say that, certainly to our staff, is you don't want to go to have a one-on-one with a CISO and just start going down this deep technical path when they usually have their SMEs there and they're not there. They're going to tune out immediately. So you got to kind of understand who it is that you're talking to be able to understand how to address concerns and how to address going forward. And what are they looking at? That global picture of the entire organization, or just these products that we're talking about today? So I'm not sure that really answers your question, but it's hard to say which is best.
Oh, that's a great answer unto itself anyway. Of course, here's one of my favorites, and that is vendor accountability. I mean, we're seeing this right now with AI everything. Again, going back to what our guest FC said in the previous episode, do you need AI on your electric toothbrush? Really? Vendors are rushing products into market without fully testing them across real-world environments. But as you wrote to me in preparation for this interview, quote, security isn't about being first, it's about being right. As a field CISO, we focus on strengthening trust by ensuring that Thales holds itself to the same high standards through testing, due diligence, and innovation that prioritize reliability over speed, end quote. So how do we make that happen when vendors want to make the sale and organizations often want to believe in the power of that next new exciting technology?
I think certainly CISOs and a lot of these engineers that vendors, I'm not talking just about us, but all vendors deal with, they're a lot smarter than vendors think, and they can see through some of the stuff that is just being sold to them. And I think my job is to make sure that the customer never feels sold to. Right? I want to make sure that they truly feel like we are a partner there. And I'll take a quote from one of my favorite CISOs who I work for, which is Pat O'Pett. And, he wrote a very good article about vendors, about the risk of some of the data or some of the products that come into their environment. And the most important thing to him is, who cares about the latest, greatest bells and whistles? What I care about is once it's in, it should do what you said it's going to do. And it should never introduce new risk in my environment. Those are the key things that I try to make sure that Thales is doing now. And that was kind of one of my conditions upon taking this role, was that, look, guys, I'm going to take a mirror, put it right back on us, and see if we are doing what we are saying we're doing. And that's the reason I don't want to be a part of sales, because it's important to me that the products are very, very well thought out and well tested before they ever get to that point to where we can sell them. That's the most important part to me. And we've gotten there, right? We've got a great product team. I get to ask the right questions at the right times and really challenge them, and I'm very satisfied with where we are versus where I know other vendors are just, let's release this, let's get it out there, and then we'll fix these bugs later on, which is a horrible way to go. And I think that goes for not just vendors, but I think it goes for internal organizations that we might have as customers. So we'll just take banks, for example. I can't tell you how many times a high-ranking business executive said, we're buying this tool. And it didn't go through the normal standard checks. It just came in and, hey, we have to use this. And it was almost always a disaster, right? It was just a bad idea to do that. Caused way more churn and issues than it ever solved for. And so, yeah, I think it happens across the board, not just people kind of dig their own holes with that one.
Seduced by the shiny toy.
That's exactly right.
Well, it's hard not to. I mean, this stuff is exciting. And if you think, well, if we don't get it, our competitors will.
Right.
So our last topic for this conversation, reputational risk. This in many ways matches technical risk, and an example that you offered is the Instagram accounts belonging to professional athletes, where bot-driven content can be used to make the player look bad and to erode team value. Now, clearly, social media doesn't have the same types of barriers. You don't have to hack into the account. You can create chaos and financial loss simply by manufacturing noise around and upon it. So that's an interesting challenge. How should organizations approach the concept of reputational risk as a tangible threat?
Yeah, that's one that I think we are all definitely kind of on our heels with a little bit, because we don't know what's coming with the deep fakes. How can someone shut down or put down the reputation of a business without ever touching the infrastructure? And I think with one of the NFL CISOs that I talked to, that was a real eye-opener for me when he said that, the players themselves, that's the face of the company. That's the value of those companies. Those Instagram accounts were getting hacked, and they were putting political things on there that were very sensitive at that time. And they had to really take action. And I've yet to meet with him yet to figure out exactly everything that he did, but I can't wait to, because I want to really dig into How did you manage that going forward? And was it just a matter of trying to make the accounts much more secure from a password perspective, or what is it you did? And I know part of it was just heavy monitoring, making sure that they kept a real close eye on each and every post that was out there. But that's going to be true with many companies. Now, if someone hacks my account or your account, we're probably, it's not gonna hurt Thales too much. But when it's like a Tom Brady kind of famous person, it's going to be huge and it's going to be all over the news. So it's definitely something we have to worry about. If it's a CEO of a company that gets hacked, they're going to have to quickly prove and explain that was a fake versus something real. So again, it's another way for us to say jobs aren't going away because of this. You're just going to add new ones to be able to kind of figure out how to mitigate these kinds of new risks that are out there that we've never had to deal with before.
It's quite fascinating to think about information as a volatile substance. I mean, we've had libel and slander for centuries, but this explosive nature, I mean, Tom Brady makes a lot of money for a lot of people, right?
Right.
So does any other celebrity, right?
Right. Yeah.
So what I really enjoyed about what you said there is it's also your willingness, and speaking collectively for Thales, your willingness to learn. We don't all have to have all the answers right away, but your willingness to learn and to find out what the solutions will be, I think, is a very welcome approach. It's not like saying, I don't know what to do. It's a matter of saying, let's build on this and work together.
Whenever I go in to meet new companies, new executives, as the field CISO for Thales, I tell them, I'm not here to tell you what's right and wrong, right? I'm here so we can learn from each other. I get to talk to a lot of people in your industry. I can tell you what's worked and what hasn't worked. You can tell me some secret sauce that you guys have figured out that works great. So they truly see it as a good partnership, and it's been a great addition, I think, to Thales to be able to bring that open, honest dialogue in when we can share that with the other customers, and everyone benefits.
Well, Jay, I could talk to you all afternoon. This is a masterclass in strategy and leadership, and not only do you dive deep into these topics, you also shine a light on some hidden corners, and that's of enormous value. So what do you have for us, let's say, as a closing piece of advice?
I think the most important thing is knowing that cybersecurity isn't about fear, it's about clarity. So just let's have these open, honest dialogues and just dig in where we can, and we'll help wherever we can.
Jay Thurston, Field CISO at Thales, I want to thank you genuinely for being here and for sharing your wisdom and experience here on the Thales Security Sessions podcast.
Thank you so much. It was absolutely fantastic to talk with you.
Remember, if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe and tell a friend or a colleague or a client or all of them about the Thales Security Sessions podcast. Not just for the next one, but for our archive of highly useful and relevant past conversations. We will be back again very soon with another episode and another discussion on the topics that you need to know about to successfully carry on in the business of information security. Until then, I'm Steve Prentice. Thanks for listening.